technology is not the problem. It's how we use it, how we orient to it that really is. But our devices are demanding more and more switches and attention from us all the time across different applications, across different areas of work, across different arenas of our life, right? From work to home and et cetera. And we're just not made for those rapid switches in connection and disconnection that technologies create for us.
That's Dr. Paul Leonardi. He's an award-winning professor of technology management at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He specializes in helping organizations take advantage of new technologies while defeating digital exhaustion. His new book, Digital Exhaustion: Simple Rules for Reclaiming Your Life, shares strategies on how to transform your relationship with your devices and build stronger connections, both in and out of the digital world. So you'll learn 1, the 2 hidden forces behind your digital exhaustion, 2, simple ways to reduce attention switching, and 3, how to reclaim your energy from your devices. I'm Pete Makaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Paul. Paul, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Pete. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to be chatting. We're talking digital exhaustion. But first, I want to know, I understand you are the youngest black belt in U.S. Aikido history. Tell us about that.
Well, I was at least circa 1992 or somewhere around there.
Oh, did some 12-year-old or someone just have to usurp you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they might have in the last couple of decades. Yeah, I started practicing Aikido when I was in 2nd grade. And I didn't like it when I started because I just wanted to be like Bruce Lee or the Karate Kid and punch and kick stuff. And my parents didn't like that idea very much and said, we'll put you in a defensive martial art. And I didn't really understand what that meant. But Aikido is about using your opponent's energy and reorienting it so that you can throw and pin and do things like that. And I think it's actually turned out to be a pretty good metaphor in my life. That like, how do you take energy that's moving in one direction and recast it so that you can move in other directions and do productive things? And so I've really enjoyed, I don't practice regularly anymore, but it's certainly an important part of my identity. And what was kind of interesting is I did it with a bunch of kids, and several of those kids ended up going on to graduate school and getting PhDs. We didn't come from like an affluent or highly educated area, but I think there's something about the discipline of doing a martial art combined with, and Aikido is very much like this, where you have to do improvisations all the time on key techniques to deal with opponents that are doing different things. And that kind of focus of technique plus improvisation is something that lends itself really well to doing research and focusing on topics, sort of ad nauseum for a really long period of time.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned directing energy because that's exactly where I thought this might go. This is we're talking about digital exhaustion. Well, first, can you define, what do you mean by this?
It's a hard thing to define in words, but let me try to define it in actions, behaviors. So here's the story I get from a lot of people. I get midway through my day. I'm staring at my screen. I realize I'm just scrolling. I'm clicking on some random stuff. I know that there's an email that I should respond to, but I just don't want to do it. My eyes are sore, but I can't look away from the screen. And I just feel this sense of blah, even though I still like my job and I like the work I'm doing. I think that really characterizes the feeling of digital exhaustion. It's that we are so enmeshed in this world of communication and tools and data coming at us, and we need it and it's useful, but it's also just wearing us out.
Well, could you share with us, I think many of us can relate to that. Like, oh yeah, sure. Okay. Understood. I'm wondering, did you discover anything really shocking as you dug into your research here?
One of the things that I expected to hear from people was, I'm going to, I want to give up my tools. I want to go on a digital detox. I want to stop using, name your social media platform. And rarely anybody said that to me. Most people said, I want to be able to do all the things, but I need to figure out, how do I do it better? How do I do it in a way that feels like I'm in control and isn't sapping all of my energy? And I thought that was interesting because most of the discourse that we have today seems to be you have this sort of either or choice. You're on social media or you decide not to be on social media. You get a dumb phone or you get a smartphone. You stay away from your tools, right? Whatever it might be. And we just don't live in a world where you can choose to walk away from most of our technology. And most people don't want to because our tools do great things. If it weren't for the internet and video conferencing and USB mics, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we like our tools, we want to use them, but we need to reorient to them in ways that are making sure that they're energizing us, allowing us to be productive, being engaged, and not sapping us of all our enthusiasm and excitement.
Well, I wonder, are they? I mean, I think some of us feel it like, yes, my phone is a problem. And I wonder if others among us are not even aware of damage being done. Can you orient us to the lay of the land with the research here?
I started questioning people about feelings of digital exhaustion in roughly 2001, 2002. And I did that because I had a few experiences when I was doing some research at this large atmospheric weather science organization. And the scientists and the admin people there kept telling me about how they loved doing research about atmospheric conditions. They loved working with these fancy computer models. And they thought they were really making a difference by giving, reports to the FAA to help with plane routings and things like that. But that they just were feeling like there was so much data coming at them and so many different tools that they had to learn that they were kind of feeling overwhelmed. And almost everybody that I talked to said that. And when I asked them, okay, well, do you feel like you are exhausted by your tools? Roughly half of them said immediately, yes. And the other half said, what do you mean exhausted by my tools? I mean, I kind of feel like worn out by them, but exhausted? I don't know. I just use them. So I've been asking that question ever since. And I've asked it thousands of times. And I've got over 12,000 people that I've interviewed, surveyed for the book. And what's happened over time is that each year, it seems that I ask that question, more and more people from that 50% that said, no, I don't feel exhausted, have been moving into the exhaustion camp. I think we're becoming more and more aware of the toll that our tools take on us. And when you read a lot of the popular press and books and things, right, like Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, right, that talks about these big problems associated with, social networking sites amongst adolescents in particular. I think more and more of us are becoming reflective about the role that technology is playing in our everyday lives in ways that we hadn't really considered before. So there's this dark side that comes with all of the positives of using our technologies, and that awareness has been growing.
So, boy, 2001 does feel like quaint, simple times.
Yeah,
as
I know.
Compared to today.
It's true.
What's our percentage at nowadays with your surveys with regard to digital exhaustion?
Yeah, so I survey people on a scale that goes 0 to 6, and it's probably not super interesting to talk about why that scale is 0 to 6. But in 2000 to 2001 timeframe, the average response was about a 2.5. So okay, I feel a little exhausted, but sort of low. In 2022, which is the last time that I really conducted a large scale survey of this, it was up above 5. So it's doubled in that 20-year period. And what's interesting is there's been 2 major inflection points. So 2 points at which the graph just sort of trended up. The first one was right around 2010. And that's a particularly important period because we had just seen the introduction of the iPhone 2.5 years prior. And Facebook reached 100 million monthly active users at that point. So 2010 represents a period of time where social media in particular really has arrived en masse for most people. And then the second inflection point was 2021, and that's right after COVID. And of course, we all know that even for those that worked really intensely on screens and in a very digitally mediated world before COVID, the move to mass working from home, interacting with everybody through digital platforms really seemed to create another spike in that graph. And what surprised me is that I would have expected at both of those points, as I was watching those numbers increase in real time, some decline afterwards. But I've not seen a decline in either of those trends after 2010 and after 2021. The numbers just sort of remain flat. And so I wonder if we just kind of keep adding a digital tax to our lives and have not been finding a way to reduce that burden.
And I also wonder, you ask about exhaustion associated with the use of the digital tools. Are we pretty sure folks are attributing it accurately or correctly? There's not some mystery third force bringing in exhaustion upon us and we just blame the tools?
There absolutely might be. There's a whole confounding set of factors that are important to consider when we talk about exhaustion. One is stress. We get stressed by lots of different things. Not all stress is bad, right? Some stress is good. It creates an adrenaline and a cortisol release that allows us to do good things. But we get stressed, and stress is different from exhaustion, I would say. Stress is kind of the more momentary feeling of, I just have to respond to these emails. It's driving me nuts. And exhaustion is the cumulative effect of those stressors over time. Now, we get stressed by many things other than our technology, right? We get stressed by the demands people placed on us. We get stressed by the way people act or behave towards us. We get stressed by the volume of work we might have. So there's lots of other stressors that are kind of mingled in with the digital activities that we're engaged in. Also, stress and exhaustion are both kind of driving forces that can lead ultimately to burnout in our jobs. But burnout is a much bigger concept than exhaustion because burnout is about how we orient to our work more broadly. Are we getting opportunities for promotion? Are we feeling like we're making a difference? And if we don't have those kinds of things, the research suggests that we tend to feel more burnout. Exhaustion, though, is a critical component of burnout. Christina Maslach, who developed one of the best burnout inventories, talks about emotional exhaustion as being one of the key predictors of burnout. And it's perhaps the one that is most prevalent when you are talking about a burnout is like, how emotionally worn are you? So digital exhaustion is certainly a part of that. Is it the only thing? No. But I do think it's one important factor that we can control through some changes in our behavior.
Mm-hmm. Well, shout out to Christina Maslach, a guest of the show. Understood. Well, then, I'm curious, theoretically, these digital devices should, quote unquote, be making our lives easier, simpler, better, lower stress, right? Like, whereas before we had to do all these old-fashioned things like, find an envelope and a stamp, to send an old-fashioned letter before email, or just ramp it up, or we have to mosey on over to a computer to send the note as opposed to getting it on our phones, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, or at least that's part of, I'd say, the promise or the marketing or the hype associated with tech tools. And we're hearing it now with AI. It's going to make your life so much easier.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
How is it that it is a factual statement that I can spend fewer minutes of my life achieving a given outcome by utilizing these digital tools, and yet I feel more exhausted instead of less exhausted with this empowerment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it feels like a paradox of sorts, doesn't it? But let's take a look at two major drivers of our digital exhaustion: attention and inference. And let me try to give you an example of why what you're saying, our tools help us to do these things that are supposed to make our life easier, but at the same time end up contributing to our exhaustion, like how both of those things can exist simultaneously. Okay. So let's start with attention. We as humans appear not to be very well made to move very quickly across lots of different tasks. Our brain takes a beat to disengage from what it's doing and re-engage in a new context. And there's lots of good science that shows, that the kind of disengagement that needs to happen makes it difficult for us to multitask. But our devices are demanding more and more switches in attention from us all the time across different applications, across different areas of work, across different arenas of our life, right? From work to home and et cetera. And we're just not made for those rapid switches in connection and disconnection that technologies create for us. So you're right on the one hand that it's wonderful that if an urgent work problem presents itself when I'm at a soccer game for my kid, I don't now have to, like, maybe 15 years ago, I got the phone call and I'm like, oh no, I need to leave the soccer game and run into the office. And that would have been really disruptive. Now I can deal with that problem on my smartphone pretty easily from the soccer field. But what that has created is this fracturing of our attention between my home life and my work life. And I'm now all of a sudden situated physically on a soccer field doing work disembodied, right? And I'm working through my screen in order to sort of be in the office. Not to mention that I'm on an application and like I'm working in Google Docs and all of a sudden I get an email notification and I quickly switch to go see what that email notification is. And then I go back to my Google Docs and I don't seamlessly pick up where I left off because it takes a while for me to readjust and port my attention over from the thing I just left. And there's lots of good research. Gloria Mark is one of my favorite scholars who does a lot of work on attention. And she gives an example that I love, which is that our attention is like a whiteboard. We think that we've written all over the whiteboard and we just erase it and we can write something new. But if you look at most people's whiteboards, you realize there's still residue left over from what they wrote before. It's really hard to erase everything.
Got to get the spray cleaner going.
Oh yeah, that little going. Mm-hmm. And that's what our minds are like. And so it takes time for us to reorient to different activities. And that reorientation, those switches in attention that those reorientations require are really a great source of our exhaustion, even though the technologies that are allowing us this access in multiple ways are making our lives easier. So that's one example, right, around attention. The next one is what I call inference. And inference turns out to be a huge driver of our exhaustion. And let me kind of take it this way. We are inundated with many, many, many data points all the time. Pieces of emails that come at us, right? We see images that are posted on Instagram or little videos on TikTok. And we get a glimpse about, well, what's this person interested in? What's this report really saying? I got this little bit of data from our customers about, how many emails they open or whatever it might be. And we are constantly forced to grapple with the fact that we see a little and we know we don't see the whole picture. And so we're always trying to fill in the blanks or make assumptions about what's going on behind the scenes. And that inference making is turbocharged now because we're constantly inundated with pieces and half-truths and little examples and almost never the full picture. And it takes a lot of cognitive and emotional work to be in a constant state of inference making. One example that I love is that I talked to, in interviews for the book, this guy by the name of Dean. And Dean was telling me how when he was just after graduating college, his buddies wanted to go on a bicycle trip through Europe. And he decided at the last minute he couldn't go because it just wasn't a financially prudent move for him. But he kept watching on Instagram, all the great places they were cycling, the beautiful vistas that they saw, the great pubs that they went to along the way and the friends they were making. And he was making all of these inferences about how they were having the time of their lives, how he felt like a loser because he couldn't go on the trip with them, so on and so forth, right? And this might just sound like, okay, so what? You're looking at a bunch of pictures of people's posts on Instagram. But having to contend with a world out there that's giving you pieces of information and making sense about where's my role in that is a really exhausting experience. And we do that all the time. Sometimes it's through images. A lot of times it's through just pieces of data that are coming in. And we're always looking at ourselves in these platforms also. How do I appear to other people? And then making inferences about how must they think that I appear given what they see about me? And, did I give the right impression? Did I not? So if that all sounds tiring, as I'm explaining it, think about what it's taking in our minds and in our hearts to do that.
Yeah. Boy, you really put a nice point on that. And in terms of inference being exhausting. And I'm thinking and talk about half-truths. I feel that when I watch the news because I'm doing exactly that. I'm trying to make sense of what's being communicated to me. And particularly, I'm going to say politicians or statements by leaders of technology or business in terms of, oh, is that true? Why do you suppose you said that? Am I being lied to right now? And is that in partially true? You said half truths. Yeah. It's like, I can imagine in a way, that's how I feel about most also marketing communications, particularly around AI products, I'd say, in terms of, okay, what you're saying seems to be technically not a lie. Like, this application does in fact do the thing you say it does. However, it does so unreliably and inconsistently, with such need for correction, fixing, editing, redoing, babysitting. It's like, I'm not quite sure it's actually useful or value added at this stage of the game in late 2025. And in fact, I saw a study associated with software engineering, for example, which says, hey, we actually did a randomized control trial associated with folks who are using AI versus not using AI, their experience, they know their code base and what they're up to. And when you measure it on the clock, it was slower, fixing the AI errors. And yet it feels faster because sometimes it gets it right and it's like, whoa, that's impressive. And, it's just a good feeling. Right. And it's sort of like wowing. And so I think you're right. In a world where we're getting lots of half-truths, it is exhausting. And I'm coming back to flashback where I had to check out potentially getting a new roof on, we owned a little multifamily home in Chicago, and it was over 100 years old, the building. And so it seemed like, oh yeah, that roof may need some care. And so I was having a heck of a time getting anybody to come on over. So I was like, you know what, the heck with it. I'm just going to call 20 roofing companies and we'll see how many people show up. And I got about 5, which I mean is striking there, 15 out of 20 just don't even want your money. But okay. So I got about 5, and it was so tricky because some people say, oh no, you got to tear off the whole thing and just start again. And I was like, oh no, we can just put another layer on the existing. It's like, well, putting another layer is much cheaper. And so I would like to do that if I can. And I found it very mentally exhausting because here I am with it was about 3 versus 2, the opinions on just another layer versus just tear the whole thing off. And I think that this is just so common of so many situations. It's like there's ambiguity, right? And we're getting different messages from different people. And you're wondering, am I being straight up lied to by one of them? Is there a nuance I'm not understanding? Like, how can I deduce what is true? And it's exhausting. I see the same thing when I'm evaluating potential marketing initiatives. Sure. It's just like, well, who knows what's going to happen? Yeah.
I like your roofing example. It rings true. And maybe we're just unlucky and need to buy roofs, the two of us. But I think this sort of puts it into perspective. In early 2000, I also owned a rental property that needed a new roof. Not making this up. And I also got some conflicting bids. And I remember thinking at the time that I know nothing about roofing, and I still don't really know much about roofing today. And I had few ways of really knowing what was the best course of action. And more importantly, I didn't think that I could find out. I really needed to figure out who was the best expert or who could I trust, and I would lean in on their expertise. Today, in 2025, if I needed a new roof and I got conflicting estimates that said you needed to do things, the first thing I would think is, I can figure out what really I need here, right? We have this impression that the world's information is at our fingertips. And if I only look in the right places, and if I do the right kind of research, I'll be able to determine what the right course of action is. The reality is, even though we might think that, it's really hard to do. But knowing that the possibility exists and thinking I should be going and looking for it is exhausting. And for many people, it's demotivating. And this is one thing I found over and over again as I was doing the studies for this book, that when you reach these kinds of critical decision points where you feel like the world's information is at my fingertips and I should be able to make a great decision out of this, and I'm an idiot if I make the wrong decision, people just don't act a lot of times. It stalls them. As kind of a funny related story, this was maybe 10 years ago. I was doing some work with a really large company, a software company that is, I won't name, but is very into search. And they would, I was with a group that helped advise companies about ad buying. And what was really funny to me in these meetings was somebody would come, like a project manager would come, and they would say, okay, here's the strategy that we think we're going to use to advise this company on how to make their ad purchases, and how to increase click-through rate, let's say. And someone on the team would say, oh, do we have data to test your hypothesis? And then everybody would kind of giggle and be like, yes, we have all the data. And so they would say, well, go test that hypothesis and then come back and then we'll decide if we should advise the company to do this or not. So they would come back and then someone would say, what if this? Oh, do we have the data for that? And then they'd all laugh and then they'd go back. And it was this whole analysis, paralysis by analysis. It's like they almost never made decisions about what to do because they realized we have all the data. We should just keep going back and looking at it. And this is the kind of thing that I see people doing all the time, is we just don't act because we feel that we should do more. And the act of trying to do more is exhausting. And knowing that I'm never going to get the complete amount of information wears us out just thinking about that. So it's this matrix of data and technology and expectation and inference that we're trapped in these days, I think, what creates these real deep feelings of why do I have to do more? Why can't I just break free?
Understood. Okay. Well, I think this is hugely valuable already, just surfacing what's going on. Oh, hey, you're doing a lot of attention switching. You're doing a lot of inferring, and you have too much to look at with regard to your switching of attention and your potential extra data points to go about your inferring. So, Paul, lay it on us. If we want to find more energy, less exhaustion, what's the most leveraged stuff we can do to achieve this?
Yeah. So where I like to begin is to say, if you understand that these attention switches, this inference making, these are the key contributors to our exhaustion, then what we need to do is figure out how do we reduce the amount that we are switching our attention and the inference making that we have to do, right? So that's the big picture. Those are the things we need to work on. So then we can start to talk about very specific strategies that help us to do that. One of them that I love that I call, it's rule number 3 in my book. It's called make a match. And the premise is simple. The execution, though, is harder. So here's the premise. We often are dealing with situations that are ambiguous. The answer is not straightforward. There's going to be some amount of negotiation or conflict that I need. These are regular occurrences in our work days and in our lives outside of work. We also deal with some situations that are pretty straightforward. Like, are you going to pick up the kid? Am I going to pick up the kid? Do we send this email to the client tomorrow morning or this afternoon? Right? We don't need to reduce a lot of ambiguity, have a lot of discussion around those issues. They're pretty easy to resolve. What I see happen often, though, is that we choose the wrong medium, the wrong tool for the job, given the level of ambiguity, disagreement, discussion that needs to take place. So think about an issue. I'll just give an example of something that happened to me. There was, we needed to do some rebudgeting in the department that I worked with. And I chair a department, and I was working with one of our assistants. I happened to be traveling. I was in Europe when this issue came up, and we needed to sort of quickly talk about the budget and recategorize some things. And I just kept thinking, this is like a straightforward issue. Let's just do X, Y, and Z. And my admin person that I was working with kept responding in these kind of weird ways, and it wasn't clear that she was going to make the changes that I was suggesting. And then I would get kind of more upset, and my email became a little tenser, and I said, look, we just need to act on this. And then there was a day response compounded by the fact that I was overseas, right? And I was 8 hours time difference. And this became such an emotionally exhausting interaction for me because I began to think, oh man, she's trying to subvert me, right? Like she's not responding on purpose to this. And I was kind of spiraling, having these negative assumptions. And what I realized kind of in the process was, this is not a super simple issue. My first impression was this was simple, but if I really thought about it, this is much more complex. And I'm trying to resolve this complex issue through email, asynchronously, and we have this time difference. And the best thing that I could do to reduce this ambiguity and to stop me making so many assumptions and her making so many assumptions is just to hop on a Zoom call. And we did, and we hammered out the whole issue in like 10 minutes. But it was 2 days or almost 3 days of me wasting my life away. It felt like being upset about this. I talked to my wife. I was like, I'm so frustrated by this interaction that I'm having. But what didn't I do? I didn't stop to say, what am I trying to accomplish here? And what's the best mode of interaction to deal with this problem? It's an ambiguous situation. It's going to require some collaboration, some real-time discussion. And if I just had picked up the phone, just had done the Zoom, I would have resolved this so much faster. But when we don't do that, things escalate. We send more emails that are pulling us out of our attention that we're paying to other things at the moment. We're forced to make more inferences about why didn't this person respond faster? What do they mean? And the same goes in the opposite direction, that if we have a super simple issue and then we have a big meeting to discuss it, when really it was like we pretty much could have just decided this via email, we waste a ton of time and attention and emotion talking to death about something that we could have resolved much more easily. So we can reduce our attention. We can reduce the amount of inference that we're making if we're matching the complexity of the challenge with the capabilities of the tool. So the shorthand here is if you've got a more complex, challenging issue, you want to use a tool that's going to put you in real-time collaboration and discussion so you can resolve those issues interactively. And if you have a pretty basic kind of thing that you're trying to solve, then switching to a low fidelity medium that just like allows you to say yes, no, agree, and move on probably is going to be the best bet. So making a match between those information requirements and the capabilities of the technology is one key way to reduce that inference making and attention switching.
That's handy. And I'm also thinking about making a match just associated with the time necessary for something. I think if you've got a mismatch on either side, it's frustrating and annoying. In terms of why are we having a 3-hour meeting about this? This is ridiculous. Versus, okay, we're just going to figure out this tricky challenge that's been vexing the business for 8 years in our little 30-minute call.
Exactly.
Well, either way, you're going to find frustration if you have a mismatch of the tool, the medium, or the time. And then I think that expectation piece as well is tricky in there because it almost seems like you quote unquote should be able to resolve it in the time that you have scheduled for it.
Oh, yeah.
When you may just have scheduled the wrong amount of time.
Yeah. And then everybody feels frustrated and demotivated because, well, clearly we didn't do our job right. We should have figured this out in an hour. We must be a dysfunctional group, or we must not have brought the right information to this meeting. When, to your point, perhaps it was an inappropriate time allotted for this in the first place, and we never could have done it. And now we just all feel worse for having tried.
All right. So make a match. What's your other favorite approach?
Yeah. Another one that I really like is the first rule that I talk about, which is reduce half your tools. And This is one that a lot of people give me the side eye about when I say it. Like, what do you mean? Like, just like stop using half of my tools. And am I really going to be able to do that? The answer is yes. You're really going to be able to get most of the way there, at least. 50% is just a rough number anyway. But if you think about these ideas of attention switching and inference, the fewer tools that we have in our tool set, the less likely we're going to be to suffer the problems associated with those two drivers of exhaustion. So one of the things that I really suggest that people focus on is to look at and really make a list of what are all the different technologies that I'm using on a daily basis. I used to ask people to do this, 10, 15 years ago, and they come up with about 10. And a lot of those were hardware. So they would say, I use my laptop and I use my BlackBerry and I use, whatever. Today, the number's more like 30. People come up with about 30 different tools that they use in a regular day. And most of those are applications. Many of them are at work. I use SharePoint. I use Zoom. I use, whatever it might be, ChatGPT. And many of those are at home. I use Instagram and I use Zillow and I use Game Changer app to keep track of my kids' volleyball games. And one of the things that I recommend is when you make this list that you first start going through and you say, okay, well, which ones of these do I have the actual power to cross off this list? And usually we have more power at home than we do at work. And then I say, well, which ones are functionally duplicates of each other? So are we using two tools to do roughly the same job? So do I have a Zoom meeting sometimes and then I have a Microsoft Teams meetings other times? Or do I use Canva and Photoshop when really they're doing the same thing and I don't know why I use both of them anyway? And so those are candidates for reducing from our list. And then there's other ones where I'm actually just sort of in charge and there aren't network effects. So, it may be that I say, I really would love to give up Slack in my organization, but I can't just give up Slack because everybody uses Slack and they depend on me. However, I've talked to a lot of people that have 2 or 3 team chat applications. And when I ask them, well, why in the world does your team have 2 or 3? Nobody can really recall. And so what I find is that many people have told me that they actually will raise this in their organizations and say, like we're chatting on Teams and on Slack and on this third application. Is it possible we could just reduce to 1? And usually the team's like, yeah, why don't we just stick with Slack or whatever? And so we actually do have the power to reduce the number of tools in our tool set. I think in more ways, we have more degrees of freedom than we typically think we do. And doing that just means that now we're switching between fewer applications and we're doing fewer things that are creating those attention switching and opportunities for inference. Just a super quick example in my own life, it used to be that in a given morning, I might be on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Cisco's WebEx. I would be doing video conferences on all 3. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, except that, I'm very comfortable with Zoom because that's the one my organization uses most often. And when I switch to a different one and I'm trying to share my screen or engage in the chat or create a breakout room, there's those moments of, where's the button for that? And how do I create the breakout room? Because I'm not as familiar with the other platform. And it's those little moments of friction add up to be exhausting. And reducing those as much as we possibly can just gives us a cleaner starting point and is going to reduce the odds that we're going to feel exhaustion from our tools if we can reduce the tool set. And my advice to leaders in organizations is that often it's difficult to really make a noticeable difference in the volume of tools that we have unless you step in and you make some decision. I had one senior leader tell me, I think of this like the Smokey the Bear slogan, only you can prevent forest fires. He's like, I feel like I really realized only I can prevent technology proliferation. And that's because you've got, the model for many of these SaaS vendors, who sell tools in your company is to price it in just a way that anybody can buy that application with their credit card, right? It sort of sneaks in right below the spending limit of, I need formal approval from IT. So you get all of these applications that kind of spring up everywhere. And unless you have someone looking and saying, look, we're not paying for 20 different subscriptions to the same kind of tool, or we don't need 3 different kind of computer rendering platforms, it's really easy to get stuck with too many tools and increase our overload.
Yeah. It's interesting how I've experienced this, and it's so funny. I mean, it doesn't seem like it should, quote unquote, be that big of a deal. But if I have to hop into 6 different tools to accomplish a task, even if it's only like a 10-minute task, it really does take a toll, more so than if I were just cruising through email, say, for 10 minutes. And it's just so funny that that's just kind of the human condition.
It's true. And we don't notice it. I think, though, I liken it to running sprints. Okay. So if you run all out on a sprint, let's say for 10 seconds, and you cover 100 meters, you feel pretty good. And the next sprint that you run, if you're not resting adequately, you might cover 100 meters in 12 seconds. And then the third one, you cover 100 meters in 14 seconds. You feel energetic, right? You feel like I can do it, but it's the accumulation of that fatigue over time that eventually hits you. And someone says, okay, run one more 100-meter sprint. And you're like, no, I can't do it, right? I'm too exhausted. And it's those little micro moments that add up to big exhaustion feelings at the end of the day, just like you described.
All right. Well, Paul, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things?
I just want to say, okay, AI. This is where I think AI, if we do it right, because we're still in the early stages, could be really useful. You know, if we can figure out how to put AI in a role that helps us to stay engaged in a task, keep our focus without having to switch across so many different applications, without having to go look for so many different pieces of information. That's where these tools could be most useful in helping to reduce our exhaustion. So I'm optimistic. I wouldn't say that I think that that's where everything is going, but I'm optimistic that these tools might be helpful as they keep us in our workflows, keep our focus and engagement in areas that we want by reducing the number of tools we need to switch across and reducing the amount of attention changes that we constantly have to make.
Big thanks to Paul for sharing his wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Vanguard. For all the financial advisors listening, let's talk bonds for a minute. Capturing value in fixed income is not easy. Bond markets are massive, murky, and a lot of firms will just throw a couple flashy funds your way and call it a day. But not Vanguard. Vanguard bonds provide top-grade products across the board. Their lineup includes over 80 bond funds actively managed by a 200-person global squad of sector specialists, analysts, and traders. Vanguard's been in the game for a long time at a scale that gives them a serious edge. They're able to invest across many sectors, maturities, and geographies, spotting opportunities that others might miss. Vanguard takes a steady approach, focusing on reliability and consistency. So if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/audio. That's Vanguard.com/audio. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor. One sponsor to check out is Quince. Quince clothing looks and feels great at an impressive price. Quince's holiday season lineup is simple and smart, including $50 Mongolian cashmere sweaters and stylish, durable wool coats. Quince partners directly with ethical factories and top artisans, so they cut out the middlemen to deliver premium quality at half the cost of other high-end brands. That means you get to give luxury quality without having to stomach the luxury price tag. I have been loving my Quince red cashmere beanie cap. It holds up super well for cashmere and really for anything. There's no holes, there's no snags, there's no tears. It is so soft, toasty, warm, and delightful. I'm wearing it this very moment. In fact, because I usually am. So give and get timeless holiday staples that last this season with Quince. Go to quince.com/awesome for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/awesome. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/awesome. One sponsor to check out is Taylor. Taylor is an award-winning AI and expert-styled menswear rental subscription service featured in GQ, Vogue, and more. Taylor's mission is to help people look good so they can achieve their personal and professional goals while reducing fashion waste to support a more sustainable future. Some guys are hard to shop for. They seem to have everything. Taylor solves that by offering many style choices. We're talking 20,000 garments, 2,000 styles, 300 brands curated just for them, making it a thoughtful clothing gift that they'll actually wear. I personally really enjoyed how quickly, easily, and delightfully I was cruising through my online style quiz. And with renting, there's no need to worry about shopping, commitment, laundry, or landfill with your clothes. So give the gift of time, convenience, and effortless style. Visit taylor.style and get 10% off Taylor gift cards with the code PODCASTGIFT. That's TAELOR.style and use code PODCASTGIFT for 10% off Taylor gift cards. All right. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspired?
Sure. I love this quote. It's attributed to the philosopher Voltaire. And I'm not sure if there's any real record that he said it, but the older I get, the more I appreciate this quote. And it's, cherish those who seek the truth, beware of those who find it.
Okay. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
Yeah, one of my all-time favorites is the JAMS study that was done by researchers at Stanford, Yangar and Lepper. And what they looked at was people buying jams, and a really neat little experimental condition where they showed people, I forget the exact number, but like 3 or 4 jams, and then said, how many did people buy jam? And then they gave them a display that had like lots of jams, like 20 jams on them. And then they said, how many people bought jams? And you were way more likely to buy a jam if you saw 3 or 4 jams than if you saw 20 jams. And their conclusion was too much choice is demotivating. And I love that. It's a simple study, a powerful finding. And every time I go to a restaurant and get one of those menus that seems to span 30 pages and can't decide what I want to eat, I remember that study.
Yeah. And a favorite book?
One of my favorites is At Home by Bill Bryson. I just really love the way Bill Bryson writes. He does a couple of things. One, he just takes these, what you would think are mundane topics, like at home. He has a 17th century English farmhouse that he lives in, and he uses that. He walks through every room in the house and uses that to talk about, well, what was life like, 4 centuries ago? And that's cool.
All right. And a favorite habit?
This is one that I've been trying to cultivate more since writing the book, and it's about being intentional. So when I pick up one of my devices or I'm going to get on my computer, I really take a beat and think, what am I trying to accomplish? And how will I know that I got there? And what that does for me is it allows me to bookend my experience. It tells me, you did it, time to close your browser. Or, okay, you finished doing this, time to put your phone down. And if I don't start with that intention, it's easy to spiral into just continuing to scroll and doing all the things that make me exhausted. So that's my new favorite habit. Be intentional every time I sit down in front of a device or pick one up.
Okay. Is there a key nugget you share that really connects and resonates and people quote back to you often?
Yeah, they say about this, the idea of, I don't want to give up all of the technologies that do great things for me. And I haven't been able to figure out what I'm supposed to do then to find the right balance. And the fact that you give some rules and say, technology is not the problem, it's how we use it, how we orient to it, that really is, they tell me that's been empowering.
All right. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
Yeah, I'd say go to paulleonardi.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. P. Leonardi is my handle there. Those are great places to find me, or at UCSB's Technology Management Department.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah, I would say really practice being there wherever you are. We live in a world that makes it very easy for us to be everywhere else but here. We can teleport in our minds to places, we can be on our devices and be halfway across the world. But there's a real power in just being where you are. Be in the meeting, be in the conversation, be with your kid. Try that, and I think you'll see there's a big difference.
All right. Paul, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
After Paul highlighted how exhausting inference is for us, I really came to realize how much energy I am wasting on trying to infer, to figure out stuff that doesn't really matter in the news or social media, or someone said a thing that doesn't quite make sense and I'm wondering how and why might they have said that thing? Are they just deliberately lying to me, or do they have a false understanding? Are they missing a key piece of information? How does it make sense to say the thing they said from their perspective? Because from my perspective, I think that's totally wrong. Are they just being straight up fraudsters, con artists? You get the idea. You can just go and go and go trying to infer, but then I stop and think, oh, wait a sec. Does it matter to my life and goals and values and priorities and decisions in any way? The answer to that? I guess it doesn't. I'm just pathologically curious. Well, I'm just going to make up an answer, say that's right for now, and let go. Great stuff from Paul. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP1112. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.